A lone figure stands silhouetted against the blazing horizon, rifle in hand, blood dried on weathered skin. Behind her, black smoke rises from a distant homestead, tendrils reaching skyward like desperate fingers. The desert stretches endlessly in all directions. Not a sanctuary, but a battlefield she has prepared for over 15 years. Each rock, each dune, each hidden sinkhole memorized and mapped in her mind. They thought she was running. They were wrong. In this merciless landscape, water isn't the most precious resource. Vengeance is. It fuels her steps across the scorching sand, keeps her alert through frigid nights. They took everything from her, believing the desert would finish what they started. But they never understood what her husband taught her. The desert doesn't care about the blood you've spilled or the tears you've shed. It only respects those who have learned its language of survival, and she speaks it fluently. The Blackwood Farm sat like a stubborn old growth at the eastern edge of the Arizona desert, neither belonging to the harsh landscape nor rejecting it. A two-story wooden structure, weathered by decades of sand-filled winds, it stood defiantly against the encroaching emptiness that stretched toward the horizon. Surrounding the main house was a collection of outbuildings, a barn, a storage shed, a small greenhouse protected by mesh netting, all meticulously maintained despite their age. Sarah Blackwood stood on her porch at dawn, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun paint the desert in hues of amber and crimson. At 52, her face was lined with wrinkles that mapped a lifetime of hardships, yet her eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning the horizon with the vigilance of someone who knew the world's dangers intimately. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her weathered hands spoke of years of physical labor. She heard the familiar creak of the screen door behind her and didn't need to turn to know it was Michael. "Morning, Ma," he said, joining her at the railing. At 24, Michael had his father's height and broad shoulders, but his eyes, keen and observant, were all Sarah's. "Morning." She passed him her coffee mug, a ritual they'd shared since he was tall enough to reach the porch railing. "Thought I heard you up before dawn." Michael took a sip and handed the mug back. "Checking the eastern fence line. Found another section compromised by the last sandstorm." Sarah nodded. "We'll reinforce it today." Their conversations were often like this, practical, sparse, focused on survival and maintenance. But beneath the efficiency lay a deep bond forged through years of isolation and shared loss. Inside the house, faded photographs told the story of what they'd lost. Captain James Blackwood stared out from frames on the mantelpiece, a tall, commanding presence in military uniform, his face serious but eyes kind. In some photos, he stood beside a younger Sarah, both wearing desert camouflage, their expressions revealing the disciplined focus of people trained for combat and survival. 5 years had passed since James's death during a classified mission. 5 years of Sarah and Michael maintaining the remote property, speaking little about the hole his absence had left in their lives, focusing instead on the daily rituals of survival that he had taught them. The Blackwood Farm wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Every aspect of the property had been designed with defense and sustainability in mind. The greenhouse provided year-round vegetables. 3 hidden wells ensured water access. The reinforced cellar beneath the house stored preserved food, medical supplies, ammunition, and emergency equipment to last months. James had prepared them for anything. Almost. Michael worked on the fence all morning, hammering metal posts deeper into the resistant ground, while Sarah checked their water collection system. By midday, the Arizona heat had become punishing, forcing them to retreat indoors to the relative coolness of the house. At the kitchen table, Sarah cleaned her favorite hunting knife, a gift from James on their 10th anniversary, while Michael pored over a topographical map of the surrounding desert marking potential flood zones for the coming monsoon season. "You ever think about leaving?" Michael asked without looking up from his map. The question hung in the air. Sarah's hand paused mid-stroke on the blade. "And go where?" she finally responded. "Anywhere. Tucson, Phoenix, places with people." To Sarah resumed cleaning the knife. "We have everything we need here." "That's not what I asked, Ma." She set the knife down and looked at her son. The questions had been coming more frequently lately. At 24, he was the same age James had been when they first met during military training. The same restlessness, the same hunger to see beyond the horizon. Your father built this place for us, for safety. Dad's been gone 5 years, and the world hasn't gotten any safer. Sarah replied, her tone final. Michael sighed and returned to his map. He knew better than to push when she used that tone. What he didn't know, what Sarah had never told him, was that their isolation wasn't just about safety from the generic dangers of the world. It was about hiding from very specific threats. Later that afternoon, while Michael worked in the barn, Sarah unlocked a hidden compartment in the floorboards beneath her bed. Inside was a small wooden box. She opened it carefully, revealing a strange, uneven stone with peculiar markings etched into its surface. The stone was unnaturally cool to the touch, even in the desert heat. James had given it to her the last time she saw him alive. Keep it hidden, he had told her. If anything happens to me, trust no one. Give this only to the person who identifies themselves as Nighthawk, no one else. She'd asked what it was. He'd only said it contained information that could destroy many powerful people, evidence of illegal military testing programs that crossed lines no human should cross. She never learned the details, only that James had discovered something terrible during his final mission. For 5 years, she'd kept the stone hidden, waiting for a Nighthawk who never came. Sometimes she wondered if she should have searched for this mysterious ally. But James's instructions had been clear. Stay hidden, stay safe, wait. So she waited, training Michael in survival skills, teaching him to read the desert as she and James once had, preparing him for a danger she couldn't fully explain. Sarah replaced the stone in its box, and the box in its hiding place. Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying dust from the east. Storm coming. They first appeared as heat distortions on the horizon, wavering figures that might have been mirages, if not for the disciplined formation they maintained. Sarah spotted them through binoculars from the watchtower James had built at the highest point of the property. 6 riders on horseback approaching from the northeast. Not rangers, their movement was too tactical. Not lost tourists, their heading was too direct. Sarah felt a coldness settle in her stomach. No one came this way by accident. She rang the warning bell once, the signal she and Michael had established for unexpected visitors. Within minutes, he appeared at the base of the tower, looking up at her with questioning eyes. Riders, she called down. 6 of them, armed. Michael's hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip. Raiders. The desert's isolation attracted all kinds: drug runners, human traffickers, desperate men with nothing to lose. They dealt with such threats before warning shots, usually sufficient to redirect unwelcome attention. Too organized for raiders, Sarah replied, climbing down. Get everything ready. Protocol 3. Protocol 3: appear peaceful, but prepared, show enough strength to deter trouble, have escape routes ready. By the time the riders approached the property's outer perimeter, Sarah and Michael stood on the porch, presenting a picture of rural hospitality. She with a shotgun held casually at her side, he with a rifle resting across his forearms. The lead rider raised his hand, signaling the others to stop 50 yards from the house. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with a face that had seen too much sun and too many battles. Something about him tugged at Sarah's memory, though she couldn't place him. Afternoon, ma'am, he called out. Apologies for the intrusion. My friends and I seem to have strayed from the tourist trail. Might we trouble you for some water for our horses? His accent was southern, his manner polite, but his eyes were cold and calculating as they scanned the property's defenses. Water trough is by the barn, Sarah replied evenly. Help yourselves, then move on. The man smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Much obliged. He turned to his companions. Rodriguez, Brooks, see to the horses. 2 of the riders dismounted and led their horses toward the barn. Sarah noted their movements, too fluid, too aware. These weren't tourists. The leader approached the porch alone, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. Up close, the nagging familiarity intensified. Sarah tightened her grip on the shotgun. Fine place you've got, he said, eyes still roaming. Don't see many homesteads this far out. You folks must be self-sufficient types. We manage, Michael replied. The man's gaze settled on Michael, studying his features. Strong young man. Reminds me of someone. His eyes shifted to Sarah. You look familiar, ma'am. Have we crossed paths before? I doubt it. No, I'm sure of it. He snapped his fingers. Military, wasn't it? You were a nurse. Afghan Theater 2003. Sarah felt her blood run cold. You've mistaken me for someone else. I don't think so, Mrs. Blackwood. The false congeniality vanished from his voice. Or should I call you Lieutenant Sarah Blackwood, 5th Medical Battalion wife of Captain James Blackwood Special Forces? Michael stepped forward, but Sarah's arms shot out, holding him back. Who are you? She demanded. The man smiled again, but it never reached his eyes. An old friend of your husband's. Name's McLean. We served together. He looked past them into the house. Mind if I come in? I've got a lot to catch up on with Jimmy's widow. Sarah knew then that everything was wrong. James had never allowed anyone to call him Jimmy, not once. We were just heading out, she said. Family emergency in Tucson. If you'll excuse us. Now that's not very hospitable. McLean's hand moved to his hip, revealing the pistol holstered there. And I've come such a long way to pay my respects. Sarah heard boots on gravel behind the house. The other men were surrounding them. Michael tensed beside her, his breathing shallow. What do you want? Sarah asked. McLean's pretense dropped completely. Why don't we discuss it inside, away from this ungodly heat? It wasn't a request. With the other men now visible at the corners of the house, Sarah saw no immediate alternative. They could shoot their way out, but the odds weren't good. Fine, she said, lowering her shotgun slightly. Michael, show our guest inside. Inside the living room, McLean made himself comfortable in James's old armchair while his men secured the perimeter. Sarah counted 5 in total, the 2 who had gone to the barn, plus 3 more who now stood at strategic points throughout the house. All carried military-grade weapons poorly concealed beneath civilian clothing. Quite the setup Jimmy had here. McLean said, admiring the reinforced windows and hidden storage compartments with a professional eye. Always the prepared one. You weren't friends, Sarah stated flatly. McLean chuckled. Smart woman. No, we weren't friends exactly. More like competitive colleagues. His expression hardened. Your husband was a sanctimonious bastard who thought he was better than the rest of us. Turned down good money because of his precious principles. What do you want? Michael demanded, still standing protectively near his mother. Right to business. I like that. McLean leaned forward. Your father took something that doesn't belong to him before his unfortunate accident. Sarah kept her face impassive, but her mind raced. The stone. They were here for the stone. My husband died in a helicopter crash during a sanctioned mission, she said. Whatever you think he took. Let's not insult each other's intelligence, McLean interrupted. Jimmy was transferring sensitive material when his chopper went down. Material that was never recovered from the crash site. He pointed at her. Material that he somehow managed to send to you before things went sideways. A tall, thin man with a scar across his throat entered from the kitchen. House is clear, boss. No sign of it. McLean's eyes never left Sarah's. Where is it, Mrs. Blackwood? I don't know what you're talking about. The scarred man stepped closer. Want me to make her talk? Not yet, Kane, McLean replied, still studying Sarah. I think we'll start with the boy. Everything happened at once. 2 men grabbed Michael. Sarah reached for her concealed ankle pistol, but another man nearly identical to Kane, but for the missing scar, pressed a gun to her temple. Easy now, ma'am, he said with a slight lisp. My brother Kane gets excited too easy. I'm the reasonable one. His free hand patted her down, finding and removing her weapon. We don't want to hurt anybody. We just need what's ours. Michael struggled against his captors as they forced him into a chair. McLean approached him slowly, pulling on a pair of leather gloves. Your father was very resistant to enhanced interrogation, he said conversationally. Let's see if that's genetic, shall we? Stop, Sarah shouted. He doesn't know anything. McLean paused. But you do. It wasn't a question. Sarah calculated her options. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Michael was their leverage against her. If she gave them the stone, they'd have no reason to keep either of them alive. If she refused, they'd torture Michael, then her, until they got what they wanted. She needed time. It's not here, she said. James buried it. McLean studied her face for signs of deception. Where? I'll have to show you. It's marked by natural formations, not coordinates. The man called Rodriguez spoke up from his position by the window. She's stalling, boss. Maybe, McLean conceded. Or maybe Jimmy was just as paranoid as we all know he was. He turned to Sarah. You have 1 hour to produce what we're looking for, or we start removing pieces of your son. Fingers first, I think. Sarah met Michael's eyes trying to communicate without words. They'd practiced for this home invasion scenario's hostage situations. James had been thorough in their training. The cellar, she said, her voice defeated. He hid a safe beneath the gun rack. McLean nodded to Rodriguez and Brooks. Check it out. Abel keep the lady company. Kane stay with the boy. As Rodriguez and Brooks left for the cellar, Sarah caught Michael's slight nod toward the kitchen. The propane tanks. Their emergency plan. Can I get some water? She asked Abel, making her voice small and frightened. Abel looked to McLean, who nodded permission. No funny business. In the kitchen, Sarah filled a glass from the tap, her movements slow and deliberate. Through the window, she could see the barn where they kept extra fuel and explosives for clearing land. If Michael could create a distraction, a shout came from the cellar, followed by cursing. Brooks emerged, rubbing his head. Booby trapped, he spat. Nearly took my damn eye out. McLean's patience visibly thinned. Mrs. Blackwood, my tolerance for games is limited. It's not a game, Sarah protested. James was careful. There are fail-safes. From his chair, Michael spoke up. I know where it is. All eyes turned to him. Sarah felt her heart stop. Michael, no. It's okay, Ma. His eyes held a message she couldn't fully read. I found it years ago, in the hidden compartment in the ammunition shed. McLean looked between mother and son, sensing deception, but uncertain where it lay. Kane Abel, take the boy to this shed. Mrs. Blackwood and I will wait here with Eliza. He nodded toward a woman Sarah hadn't noticed before, slim, dark-haired, standing silently in the corner, her hand resting on a knife at her belt. As Kane and Abel led Michael outside, Sarah felt panic rising. The ammunition shed contained enough explosives to level half the property. McLean noticed her distress. Something wrong. He doesn't know the fail-safes, she said, genuine fear in her voice now. James designed them to respond to specific pressure sequences. If Michael tries to access the compartment wrong, McLean grabbed her arm, then you better hope he's as smart as his father. Through the window, Sarah watched Michael approaching the shed with Kane and Abel flanking him. His posture had changed, shoulders back, head high, like James before a mission. Whatever he was planning, he'd committed to it. The radio at McLean's hip crackled. Boss, we're at the shed, Kane's voice reported. Kid says there's a sequence to disarm the security. Put Mrs. Blackwood on, McLean ordered, holding the radio to Sarah's mouth. Michael, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The red wire first, then the pressure plate under the loose floorboard. Remember how Dad showed you? There was a pause, then Michael's voice. I remember, Ma. I love you. Sarah felt cold dread wash over her. That wasn't the response they'd rehearsed for their emergency phrases. That was goodbye. Get him out of there, she screamed, lunging for the door. McLean grabbed her, but she fought with unexpected strength, years of training taking over. She managed to break free and run 3 steps before Eliza tackled her from behind. They crashed to the floor as a massive explosion rocked the property. The ammunition shed disappeared in a fireball that sent debris raining across the yard. Where Kane and Abel had stood was now only fire and black smoke. Michael! Sarah's scream tore from her throat. McLean stared at the inferno, his face twisted with rage. He turned on Sarah, gun raised, but Rodriguez burst in from outside. Perimeter breach, east side. Someone's running for the desert. McLean hesitated, looking toward the burning shed, then at Sarah on the floor. Eliza with me, he ordered. Brooks, Rodriguez, find whoever's out there. And you, he grabbed Sarah by the hair, forcing her to look at him. If that was your son creating a diversion, he died for nothing. We will find what we came for. He slammed her head against the floor and darkness took her. Sarah regained consciousness to the smell of smoke and blood. Her head throbbed where it had struck the floor, and her vision swam as she tried to focus. The house was quiet, too quiet. She pushed herself up, fighting waves of nausea. Michael, the explosion. She had to find him. She staggered to her feet, instinctively reaching for weapons that were no longer there. Through the windows, she could see the shed still burning, the flames having spread to part of the barn. No sign of McLean or his people. Using the wall for support, Sarah made her way to the hidden panel in the hallway, the one even Michael didn't know about. Inside was an emergency pack. James had prepared a handgun ammunition, water purification tablets, a compact medical kit, and a satellite phone that had never successfully connected out here. Voices from outside made her freeze. McLean and Rodriguez returning to the house. "Nothing in the shed but ammunition," Rodriguez was saying. "If it was there, it's ash now." "It wasn't there," McLean replied. "The kid blew himself up as a diversion. Check the perimeter again. The woman's still our best lead." Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She slipped out through the hidden passage that led beneath the porch and into the root cellar. From there, a narrow tunnel, another of James's paranoiac preparations, extended 30 yards to emerge behind a false boulder near the property's eastern fence line. The tunnel was tight, forcing her to crawl in places, the packed earth pressing close around her. The pack made progress difficult, but she pushed on, ignoring the pain in her head and the grief threatening to overwhelm her. Michael couldn't be gone. Not her son, not after James, not after everything. But she had seen the explosion, known its force. No one could have survived at that range. When she emerged from the tunnel, the desert stretched before her, vast, empty, deadly. Behind her, smoke rose from the Blackwood farm, her home for 20 years, now consuming itself in flames. Sarah allowed herself 10 seconds of paralyzed horror. 10 seconds to absorb the loss of her son, her home, her life. Then training took over. She checked the handgun, a Glock 19 loaded and with 2 spare magazines. The medical kit contained basics plus a suture set and antibiotics. The water bottle was full with purification tablets for refilling from natural sources. Not enough for extended desert travel, but enough to reach one of the caches she and James had established years ago. Sarah oriented herself, locating the distant mesa that marked the entrance to Dead Horse Canyon. 15 miles of open desert, but if she could reach it before nightfall, she'd have shelter and access to their primary survival cache. She took one last look at the burning farm, silently promising Michael she would make his sacrifice mean something. Then she turned to the desert and began to run. McLean prowled through the burning remains of the Blackwood farm like a predator denied its kill. The fire had spread to the main house, now consuming years of careful preparation and hidden defenses. His men searched methodically through areas still accessible, but the growing inferno made a thorough investigation impossible. "Nothing, boss," Brooks reported, coughing from the smoke. "If it was here, it's gone now." McLean's jaw tightened. "The woman escaped." "Impossible," Eliza said flatly. "I secured her myself." "Then where is she?" McLean gestured to the burning buildings. "Check the perimeter again. She knows where it is and she's on foot. She can't have gone far." As his team resumed the search, McLean moved away from the flames, pulling a satellite phone from his jacket. It connected after 3 attempts. "It's McLean," he said when the call connected. "We have complications." The voice that responded was cultured, elderly, with the clipped precision of old military brass. "I don't pay you for complications, McLean. I pay for results. The son is dead. The woman escaped. The property is compromised." A long silence followed. "And the package, not yet recovered, but we're tracking the woman. She must have it with her." "Must have, you assured me this would be a simple retrieval." McLean watched the farmhouse roof collapse in a shower of sparks. "Nothing involving the Blackwoods has ever been simple, General." "Find it," the voice commanded. "Whatever it takes. If that data surfaces, we're all finished. Use local assets if necessary." "Understood, General Westbrook." McLean ended the call and stared out at the desert, stretching beyond the burning farm. Sarah Blackwood was out there somewhere, carrying the only evidence of Project Chimera, the illegal human experimentation program that would destroy them all if exposed. James Blackwood had died trying to reveal it. Now his wife carried his deadly secret into the desert. McLean smiled grimly. He knew deserts, had hunted men across them on 3 continents. The desert was always on the hunter's side, hostile to the prey, patient with the predator. "I'm coming for you, Sarah," he murmured to the empty horizon. "You and whatever Jimmy sent you." 100 miles away, Sarah Blackwood moved across the desert like a ghost, her feet finding the paths of least resistance through the harsh terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly, but she maintained a steady pace, conserving energy and water with the discipline of someone raised in these conditions. The stone was secure in her pack, wrapped in cloth and nestled against emergency supplies. Whatever secrets it contained had cost her everything: her husband, her son, her home. As she walked, her grief morphed slowly into something harder, colder, more focused. James had trained her not just to survive, but to fight. For 15 years, they had prepared for disasters, invasions, emergencies of all kinds. She had never imagined the enemy would be her husband's former comrades, or that the stakes would be so devastatingly personal. The mesa grew larger on the horizon, its shadow promising temporary relief from the sun. Sarah adjusted her course slightly, using landmarks only she and James would recognize: a distinctive boulder formation, a lightning-struck Joshua tree, the subtle color change in the distant cliffs. The desert wasn't just her escape route. It was her weapons cache, her pharmacy, her fortress. Every path she'd walked with James, every survival technique they'd practiced with Michael, every cache they'd established, and terrain advantage they'd mapped, all of it would now serve her purpose. Sarah Blackwood wasn't running away. She was preparing for war. Night fell across the desert, bringing the temperature plummeting from blistering heat to bone-deep cold. At the burning remains of the Blackwood farm, Sheriff Tom Harris surveyed the destruction with a troubled expression. "You're telling me a propane explosion did all this?" he asked the fire captain. "Looks that way," the captain replied. "Found 2 bodies by what used to be a storage shed. 2 charred for immediate identification." Sheriff Harris frowned. "The Blackwoods kept to themselves. 2 people out here, mother and son. These bodies both male. Hard to tell in their condition, but yeah, looks like it." Harris walked the perimeter, his flashlight beam playing across the sand. Something wasn't right. Blackwood was a former military family. They wouldn't have been careless with propane. His light caught something in the sand footprints leading east away from the property. A single set moving with purpose. "Sarah," he murmured. Harris had known the Blackwoods for years, as much as anyone could know a family that valued privacy above all else. James had occasionally joined him for a quiet drink in town, speaking little of his military service, but offering advice on desert survival that had saved Harris's life more than once during search and rescue operations. After James died, Sarah had withdrawn further, focusing entirely on her son and their isolated existence. Harris checked on them monthly, respecting their desire for solitude while maintaining the tenuous connection of distant friendship. Now James was 5 years dead, the farm was ashes, and Sarah was running into the desert that had been their second home. Harris made a decision. He walked back to his cruiser, well away from the fire crews and EMTs. "Dispatch, this is Harris. The Blackwood farm fire is under control. 2 casualties pending identification. No sign of Sarah Blackwood, likely visiting family in Tucson, as mentioned last week. I'll file a complete report tomorrow." He ended the radio call and stared out at the desert. Whatever trouble had found the Blackwoods, Sarah deserved a head start. He owed James that much. As Harris turned to leave, his headlights briefly illuminated a figure watching from the shadows, a man in desert camouflage, his face weathered like the landscape itself. When Harris looked again, the figure was gone. The sheriff shivered despite the lingering heat from the fire. The desert held its secrets close, and the Blackwoods had been part of those secrets. Now something had disturbed that delicate balance, and the consequences were spreading like ripples in sand. Whatever was coming, Harris suspected they were only seeing the beginning. The desert at dawn was a different world, the harsh clarity of daylight replaced by soft blue shadows and gentle gold along the eastern horizon. Sarah Blackwood watched this transformation from her position in a narrow cave at the base of the mesa, her body aching from the 15-mile trek through the night. She had reached Dead Horse Canyon just as the last light faded, navigating the treacherous approach by memory and touch. The cache James had established years ago remained undisturbed, a waterproof container holding dried food, ammunition, a first aid kit more comprehensive than her emergency pack, and a detailed topographical map of the surrounding 50 miles. Now, as the new day broke, Sarah allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what had happened. Michael was gone. Her beautiful, brave son had sacrificed himself to give her this chance. She closed her eyes, pressing her fist against her mouth to stifle the sobs that threatened to overtake her. 5 minutes. She would give herself 5 minutes to grieve, and then she would become what James had trained her to be: a survivor, a warrior, a ghost in the desert. When the 5 minutes ended, Sarah wiped her face and began to plan. McLean and his team would be tracking her. They were trained hunters, but this was her territory. James had chosen the Blackwood farm precisely because the surrounding desert offered tactical advantages to those who understood its secrets. Sarah studied the map, identifying potential ambush points and natural traps. The terrain to the east became increasingly treacherous slot canyons, prone to flash-flooding sinkholes hidden beneath seemingly solid ground, shifting dunes that could swallow equipment and men. She checked her supplies. The Glock with 3 magazines, a hunting knife, water for 2 days if carefully rationed, food for 3, the stone James's legacy and burden secure in an interior pocket of her jacket. Sarah had no illusions about her chances against 6 trained killers in a direct confrontation. But she didn't need to fight them all at once. The desert would be her ally. Divide and conquer. With a plan forming, she packed her supplies and moved deeper into the canyon. The path ahead narrowed, forcing her to sidestep through passages barely wide enough for her shoulders. Few people knew these routes existed, and fewer still would risk following them. But Sarah moved with confidence born from years of exploration with James. Her first task established where the enemy was. There was a vantage point half a mile ahead that offered a clear view back toward the farm. From there, she could assess her pursuer's approach. As she navigated the twisting path, Sarah reflected on what little she knew about McLean. James had mentioned him occasionally, a fellow Special Forces operator whose methods had become increasingly brutal during their deployments. "Man's got a void where his conscience should be," James had said once. "Sees people as targets or tools, nothing in between." And now she was his target. The vantage point revealed what she had feared, a dust cloud moving east from the direction of the farm. They had found her trail despite her careful movement. 6 horsemen maintaining a steady pace that would bring them to the canyon entrance by mid-morning. Sarah studied them through the compact binoculars from the cache. McLean led the group, his posture rigid with determination, even at this distance. Behind him rode the others she had glimpsed at the farm: Rodriguez Brooks Kane's twin Abel, the quiet woman Eliza, and another man she didn't recognize. All were armed, their weapons no longer concealed under the pretense of being lost tourists. They were hunters now, moving with military precision across terrain that would kill the unprepared. Sarah retreated from her observation point mind, calculating distances and times. They would reach the canyon soon, but the entrance offered multiple paths, if she could separate them. She worked quickly, preparing the canyon as James had taught her. Small rock cairns placed at key junctions, seemingly innocent trail markers that would lead unwary followers into danger. A false path marked with subtle signs of human passage. A scuffed rock here, a deliberately broken branch there. The sun climbed higher as Sarah completed her preparations and positioned herself on a narrow ledge overlooking the canyon entrance. From here, she could observe unseen as McLean's team approached. They arrived at the canyon entrance with the sun directly overhead, dismounting to examine the ground. The man she didn't recognize leaned with a face weathered into deep creases by sun, and wind knelt to study her tracks. "She came this way," he confirmed, pointing to marks Sarah had deliberately left. "Not trying to hide her trail." "Either desperate or confident," McLean responded, scanning the canyon walls with narrowed eyes. "Brooks, what's your assessment?" The man called Brooks, older than the others with a nervous energy about him, studied the canyon. "Multiple routes once we're inside. Tight passages, bad place for an ambush. Or the perfect place to divide us," McLean said thoughtfully. "Rodriguez Abel, take the left fork. Brooks, you're with me on the center path. Eliza Sullivan, right fork. Stay in radio contact. First sign of the woman, you call it in. We want her alive if possible." "And if not possible," Abel asked, checking his weapon. McLean's expression hardened. "Then we recover the package and leave what's left for the coyotes." Sarah watched them split into 3 teams, each taking a different path into the canyon. Perfect. She slipped away from her vantage point and moved deeper into the maze of stone, heading for her first target. Rodriguez led the way along the left fork, following the subtle markers Sarah had left. Abel watched their flanks, weapon ready. "You knew the husband?" Abel asked as they navigated a narrow passage. Rodriguez grunted. "Served with him briefly. Blackwood was a Boy Scout, all about rules of engagement and civilian casualties." He spat into the dust. "Got men killed with his hesitation. And the wife? Field nurse. Tough lady. Saved my ass once when a mission went sideways." Rodriguez paused, examining a small cairn of stones. She stacked these as markers. Clever. Abel frowned at the cairn. Why would she mark her own trail? Rodriguez was already moving forward. Maybe she's doubling back later. Maybe she's losing it from dehydration. Either way, she's making our job easier. The passage widened into a small canyon with high walls on three sides. More cairns led toward a promising crevice on the far side. There, Rodriguez pointed. She went through there. Abel hesitated. Feels wrong. Too obvious. You got a better idea, Rodriguez countered, already crossing the open space. He was halfway across when the ground beneath him shifted. Rodriguez froze, eyes widening, as the seemingly solid surface began to sink beneath his weight. Quicksand, he breathed. Abel, throw me a line. Abel fumbled for the rope at his belt, but it was too late. The sand had already claimed Rodriguez up to his waist, the thick mixture gripping like cement. Stop struggling, Abel called, uncoiling his rope. You'll just sink faster. But panic had taken hold of Rodriguez. He thrashed violently, trying to swim through the viscous trap, each movement driving him deeper. By the time Abel had secured his position and prepared to throw the line, only Rodriguez's head and one outstretched arm remained above the surface. Throw it! Throw it! Rodriguez screamed, his face contorted with terror. Abel hurled the rope, but his throw fell short, landing just beyond Rodriguez's desperate reach. As Abel prepared for another attempt, a strange sound emanated from beneath the sand, a chittering, rustling noise that grew louder by the second. Rodriguez heard it too. His struggles intensified. Something's down there. Something's in the sand. Abel watched in horror as black specks appeared on Rodriguez's exposed skin, tiny shapes moving with purpose. Fire ants, thousands of them, disturbed by the intrusion into their nest, and now swarming over the helpless man. Rodriguez's screams echoed through the canyon as the ants covered his face, entering his nose-mouth. Ears, every exposed orifice. Abel backed away, frozen by the sight of his comrade being consumed alive. When the screams finally stopped, Abel turned and ran back the way they had come, fumbling for his radio to warn the others. He never saw Sarah step from her hiding place behind a boulder, watching him flee with cold calculation in her eyes. One down. Brooks and McLean followed the center path, moving cautiously through the narrowing canyon. The walls rose on either side, reducing the strip of visible sky to a thin blue line overhead. Don't like this, Brooks muttered, eyes darting nervously between the high walls. Too enclosed, McLean studied him. You're jumpier than usual. Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead despite the canyon shade. Been having the dreams again. Kandahar, the tunnel collapse. Focus on the present, Brooks. I need your skills, not your PTSD. Brooks nodded, but his hand still trembled slightly as he checked his canteen. Water's running low. How long we staying out here? As long as it takes, McLean replied. They continued in silence, the canyon twisting through the ancient stone. Signs of Sarah's passage appeared sporadically, a footprint in sand, a disturbed rock, a broken cactus spine. McLean noted each with growing suspicion. She's leaving too clear a trail, he said finally. Blackwood was trained better than this. Brooks squinted ahead. Maybe the heat's getting to her. Dehydration makes you sloppy. No, McLean shook his head. She's playing games. The radio at his hip crackled with static. Then Abel's panicked voice broke through. Rodriguez is down, I repeat. Rodriguez is down. Some kind of quicksand trap with fire ants. McLean grabbed the radio. Where are you? Heading back to the entrance. She's setting traps, man. The whole canyon is rigged. Stay where you are. We'll regroup. McLean switched channels. Eliza Sullivan report. Only static answered. McLean cursed and turned to Brooks. We're pulling back. This is her turf. She's got the advantage. But Brooks wasn't listening. His attention was fixed on something glinting in the sand ahead, a small metal object half buried. A canteen. Water! Brooks whispered, his cracked lips suddenly desperate. Without waiting for McLean's order, he lurched forward. Brooks, wait! McLean called, but the man was already kneeling by the canteen, unscrewing the cap with shaking hands. The liquid inside wasn't water. The smell hit Brooks a second before the clear liquid touched his lips, a chemical odor that triggered an instant warning in his brain. But the damage was done. Even the small amount that contacted his cracked lips began to burn, immediately spreading fire across his face. Brooks screamed, dropping the canteen and clawing at his mouth. The liquid, some kind of caustic acid, ate into his skin wherever it touched. He staggered backward, falling to his knees as the burning sensation intensified. McLean rushed to him, pulling a medical kit from his pack. "Hold still." But Brooks was beyond reason, lost in a hallucination triggered by the chemical and his own PTSD. In his mind, he was back in that collapsed tunnel in Kandahar, suffocating in darkness. His hands found his sidearm, raising it not toward any external threat, but to his own temple. "No light," he babbled through blistered lips. "No air. Can't breathe." McLean lunged for the weapon, but Brooks was already pulling the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the canyon, sending birds scattering from the high walls. As Brooks's body slumped to the ground, McLean spun in a defensive crouch, weapon raised. Nothing moved in the canyon. No sign of Sarah. Just the deadly stillness of the desert and the cooling body of his tracker. "You're good, Sarah," he muttered, backing toward the canyon entrance. "But so am I." Eliza and Sullivan moved silently along the right fork communication, limited to hand signals. Unlike the others, they maintained strict tactical discipline, checking blind spots and potential ambush positions. Sullivan, the weathered man with the lined face, moved with the confidence of someone born to the desert. His eyes constantly scanned the ground and walls, alert for signs of disturbance or danger. They had progressed nearly a mile into the canyon when Sullivan raised his fist, the signal to halt. He pointed to a narrow gap between two towering rock faces, a natural choke point ahead. Eliza nodded, understanding. Perfect ambush location. They would need to approach with extreme caution. Sullivan motioned for Eliza to provide cover while he scouted ahead. She took position behind a boulder rifle, ready as Sullivan crept toward the gap. He moved like a shadow, each step placed with deliberate care. 5 meters from the gap, he stopped and studied the ground. Something wasn't right. The sand showed no recent footprints, yet all other signs indicated their quarry had passed this way. Sullivan knelt, examining the canyon floor more closely. That's when he noticed it, the subtle difference in sand coloration, forming a narrow rectangular shape across the path. A pit trap concealed beneath a thin crust of harder sand and carefully arranged to appear natural. Sullivan smiled grimly. The woman was good, better than he'd expected. He backed away from the trap and returned to Eliza, explaining his discovery through hand signals. Together they circled wide, finding a more difficult but safer route that bypassed the choke point entirely. As they rejoined the main path beyond the trap, Sullivan paused to examine new tracks in the sand. Different footprints, now smaller, lighter. Not Sarah's. Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the canyon walls. Someone else was out here. A third party. He signaled this information to Eliza, who frowned. Complications. Their radios had stopped working 10 minutes ago, the high canyon walls blocking transmission. They were on their own. The new tracks led toward a box canyon ahead, a dead end. Sullivan's instincts screamed warning. This felt wrong, but Eliza was already moving forward, drawn by the prospect of trapping their target. Sullivan hurried after her, grabbing her arm to hold her back, but she shook him off with an impatient glare. As they approached the box canyon entrance, a shadow detached itself from the rock wall, a figure dressed in desert camouflage that rendered them nearly invisible against the stone. Before either could react, the figure spoke in a deep, weathered voice. "You're tracking the wrong prey, soldiers." Sullivan froze, recognition flickering across his features. Eagle Eye. The figure stepped forward, revealing an elderly Native American man with long gray hair tied back in a practical braid. His face was deeply lined, eyes sharp as a hawk's beneath heavy brows. "Been a long time, Sullivan," Eagle Eye said. "Still hunting for other men's profit." Sullivan lowered his weapon slightly. "You know this woman we're tracking?" "I know what you're really hunting," Eagle Eye replied. "And it's not her, it's what she carries." Eliza raised her rifle, aiming at Eagle Eye's chest. "Where is she?" Eagle Eye seemed unconcerned by the weapon. "Safe. For now." His eyes shifted to Sullivan. "James Blackwood was a good man. A friend to my people. His wife deserves the same respect." Sullivan's expression hardened. "James is dead, and we have orders." "Always orders," Eagle Eye sighed. "Always following someone else's map." He turned as if to leave. "Go back to McLean. Tell him the desert claims its own." Eliza's finger tightened on the trigger. "We're not leaving without..." Her sentence ended in a gurgle as a knife blade sliced across her throat from behind. Sarah Blackwood stepped from the shadows where she had crept during their conversation, her expression cold as she caught Eliza's falling body. Sullivan reacted instantly, raising his weapon, but Eagle Eye moved with surprising speed for his age. A throwing knife appeared in his hand and then in Sullivan's shoulder, causing his shot to go wide. Sarah was on him before he could recover, driving her knee into his stomach and wrenching the rifle from his grasp. The two opponents faced each other, Sullivan bleeding but still dangerous, Sarah armed with his own weapon. Sarah Blackwood. Sullivan gasped. James spoke of you, said you were the most dangerous person he ever met. Sean. James talked too much, Sarah replied, keeping the rifle steady. Who are you? Just a tracker, hired gun. Why are you hunting me? Sullivan grimaced, pressing his hand against his wounded shoulder. Orders, like the old man said. What's on the stone? Sarah demanded. Why is it worth my son's life? Something like regret flashed across Sullivan's face. I don't know. I just find people. What happens after isn't my business. Sarah studied him, weighing truth against lies. Go, she said finally. Tell McLean I'm done running. The desert is my home, not my hiding place. Sullivan hesitated clearly, calculating his chances if he attacked. Eagle Eye stepped closer, another knife visible in his hand. Sullivan nodded once and backed away. You're making a mistake, he said. McLean won't stop. Neither will I, Sarah replied. When Sullivan disappeared around the canyon bend, Sarah lowered the rifle, the hard mask of her expression cracking, to reveal exhaustion beneath. Eagle Eye placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've walked a hard road, daughter of the desert. Sarah looked at him, recognition dawning. You're Nighthawk. The old man's eyes widened slightly. James told you about me. He said if anything happened to him, I should find Nighthawk. She reached into her jacket, withdrawing the stone. He said to give you this. Eagle Eye stared at the strange object, its surface etched with markings that seemed to shift in the changing light. I've been waiting for this, he said softly. Come, we need to leave this place before the hunter returns with reinforcements. Kane's body was found half buried in the explosion debris at the Blackwood farm, finally identified by dental records. Abel identified Rodriguez's remains, or what was left of them, after the fire ants. Brooks was retrieved from the canyon, his self-inflicted wound leaving no question as to his fate. Eliza was never found. The desert had claimed her completely. McLean stood in the makeshift command tent they'd established at the canyon entrance, studying a map spread across a folding table. 3 operatives lost in less than 24 hours. The woman was more resourceful than he'd anticipated. Sullivan entered the tent arm in a makeshift sling face, grim. Report, McLean ordered without looking up. I made contact, Sullivan said. She's not alone. That got McLean's attention. Explain. Eagle Eye is with her, the old Apache tracker who worked with James during the border operations. McLean's expression darkened. Nighthawk. You know him. I know James trusted him more than his own commanders. McLean studied the map again. If they're together, they're heading for the old training grounds caves in the eastern ridge, where James trained local scouts. She has the stone, Sullivan added. I saw it. McLean nodded, unsurprised. Of course she does. That's why she ran to deliver it to Nighthawk. He traced a route on the map with his finger, calculating distances and terrain challenges. We need local support. Someone who knows the area but isn't connected to the Apache community. Sullivan considered this. The sheriff, Tom Harris. He and James were drinking buddies. Perfect, McLean said. Make the call. Tell him we're federal agents tracking a domestic terrorist with stolen government property. Offer whatever incentive you need. As Sullivan left to arrange the contact, McLean returned to studying the map. The operation was unraveling too many casualties, too many variables. General Westbrook would be displeased. But McLean had his own reasons for pursuing Sarah Blackwood now. It had become personal. She had outmaneuvered him, destroyed half his team. His reputation was at stake. The stone was still the mission, but Sarah's death would be his satisfaction. Eagle Eye led Sarah through passages in the canyon that even she didn't know existed, crevices that appeared impassable until approached from precisely the right angle ledges, invisible from below, that provided pathways across seemingly insurmountable obstacles. They moved through the night, resting only when necessary. Sarah's exhaustion burned away under the urgency of their journey and the questions that had plagued her for 5 years. "James never told me what was on the stone," she said during one brief rest. "Only that it was dangerous." Eagle Eye held the object in his palm, studying the strange markings. "Your husband discovered something during his final mission, a military program called Project Chimera. Illegal testing on soldiers, civilians, even children. Genetic manipulation, chemical enhancements, neural programming." "Human experimentation," Sarah whispered, the horror of it sinking in. "Worse than that," Eagle Eye replied. "They were creating weapons out of people, removing humanity to build perfect killers." He turned the stone in the moonlight. "This contains the evidence, GPS coordinates, personnel files, video documentation, everything needed to expose the program and those behind it." "How is that possible? It's just a stone." Eagle Eye smiled slightly. "Not just a stone. Look closer." Sarah examined the object again. What she had taken for natural markings were actually microscopic etchings patterns, too precise to be anything but manufactured. "It's a data storage device," she realized, disguised as a natural object. "Military prototype," Eagle Eye confirmed. "James stole it from the project labs during his last mission. He knew they would kill him for it, so he sent it to you for safekeeping until he could arrange secure transport to people who could expose the truth." "But he never got the chance," Sarah said quietly. "His helicopter crash was no accident. The same people who came for you arranged it." Sarah felt cold anger solidifying in her chest. "Who are they?" "General Andrew Westbrook heads the program. McLean is his enforcer, a former test subject himself, though he may not even remember it. The neural programming affects memory, creates loyal soldiers who don't question orders." "And James discovered this?" Eagle Eye nodded. "He was assigned to security for what he thought was a standard research facility. When he learned the truth, he couldn't stand by and watch. That conscience of his." The old man smiled sadly. "It got him killed, but it might save many others." "If we can get the stone to the right people," Sarah said. "There's an FBI contact, Agent Collins, trusted by James. He's been investigating Westbrook for years but lacked evidence." Eagle Eye gestured eastward. "We'll reach the caves by dawn. There's a communication setup there, old but functional. We can make contact." They resumed their journey, the stone now a physical weight in Sarah's pocket that matched the invisible weight of responsibility on her shoulders. James had died for this. Michael had died for this. Whatever was on the stone had better be worth the cost. As they climbed a steep ridge that would lead them to the cave system, Sarah paused to look back across the vast desert they had traversed. Somewhere out there, McLean was hunting them. He had resources, weapons, and determination. But she had the desert, and now she had a purpose beyond mere survival. "They think I'm running," she said quietly. Eagle Eye looked at her, understanding in his ancient eyes. "But you're not." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice hardening. "I'm hunting." The caves in the eastern ridge were ancient eroded chambers in the living rock that had sheltered humans for thousands of years. Handprints from long-dead ancestors still adorned some walls alongside faded pictographs depicting hunts and ceremonies lost to time. Dawn broke as Sarah and Eagle Eye entered the main cavern, its high ceiling disappearing into shadow despite the growing light outside. The air was cool and dry, a blessed relief after their night journey across the desert. "James and I trained scouts here," Eagle Eye explained, leading Sarah deeper into the cave system. "Taught them how to survive, how to move unseen through the desert." "My husband never mentioned you," Sarah said, following the old man through a narrow passage. Eagle Eye smiled slightly. "James compartmentalized his life. Soldier, husband, friend. He kept each role separate, believing it protected those he cared about." "Fat lot of good it did," Sarah muttered. They emerged into a smaller chamber, equipped with basic living necessities: a propane stove, sleeping bags, plastic containers of supplies. In one corner sat an old ham radio setup connected to a solar-powered battery. "My home," Eagle Eye said simply, "since the reservation became too political." Sarah took in the Spartan accommodations with appreciation for their practical efficiency. "James designed our farm the same way. Essential systems, backup plans, contingency caches. He learned that from me." Eagle Eye said, without pride, merely stating fact. As I learned from my father and he from his. He moved to a rock shelf where various weapons were carefully arranged: knives, a compound bow, several firearms, including a scoped rifle that Sarah immediately recognized. That's a Barrett M82, she said, running her fingers along the rifle's barrel. Military issue. James left it here, Eagle Eye confirmed. Along with this. He reached behind the weapons and retrieved a weathered leather journal, its pages dog-eared and stained from frequent handling. He handed it to Sarah, who opened it to find James's familiar handwriting, filling the pages: training notes, terrain observations, and in the back, personal reflections. Sarah's throat tightened as she read entries from the last months of her husband's life. April 15th. Growing concerns about Project Chimera. Requisition patterns don't match the stated research objectives. Missing personnel files. Westbrook evading direct questions. May 3rd. Witness test subject 22 in training simulation. Inhuman speed and pain tolerance. No emotion, not even satisfaction in success. What are they doing to these people? June 17th. McLean volunteered for treatment. He's been different since returning. More efficient, less troubled by the moral gray areas. The man I served with for 6 years wouldn't recognize himself now. The final entry, dated just 3 days before James's death, was brief but chilling. Sarah, if you're reading this, I failed. The evidence is on the stone. Trust only Nighthawk. I'm sorry for bringing this darkness to our door. Remember, the desert endures, and so will you. I love you both more than life. Sarah closed the journal, holding it against her chest for a moment before looking up at Eagle Eye. He knew they would kill him, she said quietly. Eagle Eye nodded. James made preparations. This place was our fallback position: communication equipment, weapon supplies, everything needed to expose Chimera. Why didn't you contact me after he died? I tried, Eagle Eye said, regret evident in his voice. But Westbrook's people were watching you. Coming directly would have put you at risk before you were ready. He gestured to the cave around them. Instead, I prepared this place. Waited for you to find your way to me. 5 years is a long wait, Sarah observed. The desert teaches patience. Eagle Eye replied simply. He moved to the radio equipment and began checking connections. We should contact Agent Collins. Let him know we have the stone. As Eagle Eye worked, Sarah studied the topo maps pinned to the cave wall, showing the surrounding 50 miles of desert in meticulous detail. James had marked strategic points, water sources, elevated positions, escape routes. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a base of operations. You and James weren't just training scouts, she realized. You were preparing for this, for when Chimera would need to be exposed. Eagle Eye didn't look up from the radio. James always saw further ahead than most. He knew what would happen when he took the evidence. Knew they would come eventually. But he didn't know it would cost, Michael, Sarah said, her voice hardening. Eagle Eye finally looked at her, his eyes ancient and sorrowful. No, that weight falls on my shoulders as well. I should have acted sooner. Before Sarah could respond, the radio crackled to life. Eagle Eye adjusted frequencies, listening for specific patterns in the static. After several minutes, he found what he was searching for: a repeating sequence of tones that Sarah recognized as an encrypted call signal. Military frequency, she noted. Secure channel, modified by James. Eagle Eye confirmed. Only 3 people have the decryption key: myself, James, and Agent Collins. He picked up the microphone and transmitted a series of corresponding tones. They waited. Minutes stretched into half an hour with no response. Eagle Eye tried again, receiving only static in return. Could be atmospheric interference, Sarah suggested. Eagle Eye shook his head. Something's wrong. Collins always monitors this frequency. He shut down the radio. We need to move. If we can't contact Collins remotely, we'll have to reach him directly. How? We're in the middle of the desert with no vehicle. There's a ranger station 30 miles north. Eagle Eye said, already gathering essential supplies into a pack. Working phone line. We can contact Collins from there. Sarah checked the Barrett rifle, finding it clean and operational with a full magazine. And if McLean finds us before we get there? Eagle Eye handed her additional ammunition. Then we ensure the stone reaches Collins by any means necessary. His expression was grave. Even if we don't. Sheriff Tom Harris stood at the edge of what locals called Death Valley, not the famous national park, but a treacherous section of desert east of the Blackwood property. Beside him, McLean surveyed the terrain through high-powered binoculars. "You sure about this?" Harris asked, shifting uncomfortably. "That area's got sinkholes, flash flood channels, all kinds of natural hazards." "She's out there," McLean said with certainty. "Your men checking the northern approaches?" Harris nodded, the reluctance showed in every line of his body. "Two deputies at the old fire road, two more covering the ranger station." He hesitated. "Look, McLean, you said this was about recovering stolen government property, but this is starting to feel like a manhunt." McLean lowered the binoculars, fixing Harris with a cold stare. "Sarah Blackwood is a dangerous woman in possession of classified material that threatens national security. My authority comes directly from the highest levels." "Still haven't seen any paperwork on that," Harris observed. McLean reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Perhaps this will clarify matters." Harris opened it to find several photographs his younger self with a known drug trafficker accepting an envelope of cash, a secret he thought buried 15 years ago. "Where did you get these?" he demanded, voice suddenly hoarse. "The question isn't where I got them," McLean replied. "The question is where they'll go if you become unhelpful." Harris stared at the photos, then at the desert stretching before them. "What do you need me to do?" "Find her," McLean said simply. "Use your local knowledge. Bring her to me." "And the old Apache with her?" McLean's expression hardened. "Collateral damage." Harris pocketed the photos, hating himself but seeing no alternative. "There's an old mining trail that cuts through the ridge. If they're heading north, they'll use it. Saves miles of difficult terrain." "Show me," McLean ordered. As they returned to the vehicles, Sullivan approached with the satellite phone. "General Westbrook," he said, offering the device to McLean. McLean took it, stepping away for privacy. "Sir?" "I'm hearing troubling reports, McLean." Westbrook's cultured voice came through clearly, despite the remote location. "Multiple casualties, property destruction, a sheriff's department now involved." "Necessary escalation, sir. The situation evolved beyond our initial parameters." "Do you have the package?" "Not yet, but we've narrowed the search area significantly." A pause. "And the Blackwood woman?" "Still alive," McLean admitted, "more resourceful than anticipated." "Like her husband," Westbrook observed coldly. "Eliminate her. Today. This operation is attracting attention we can't afford." "Understood, sir." "And McLean," Westbrook's tone grew sharper, "if you fail to recover the package, don't bother reporting back. There will be no extraction, no support. You'll be disavowed." The call ended, leaving McLean staring at the dead phone. He'd served Westbrook faithfully for years, done things that would damn his soul if he believed in such things. And now one mistake would erase it all. He rejoined the others, his expression revealing nothing of the conversation. "The mining trail," he said to Harris. "Take us there, now." Sarah and Eagle Eye moved through the desert with the efficiency of those who understood its rhythms. Despite his age, Eagle Eye maintained a pace that would exhaust men, half his years, his knowledge of the terrain, allowing them to conserve energy by using natural pathways through the harsh landscape. They stopped at midday in the shadow of a massive boulder, taking shelter from the punishing sun. Sarah checked the Barrett rifle while Eagle Eye consulted his mental map of the region. "The mining trail is 3 miles ahead," he said. "It will lead us through the ridge to easier ground beyond." Sarah nodded, appreciating the tactical clarity of his information. "Exposed for half a mile where it crosses a plateau. Good sightlines in both directions. Defensive positioning, limited. A few rock formations for cover, but mostly open ground." Sarah considered this. "Perfect place for an ambush." "Yes," Eagle Eye agreed, "which is why we won't take the trail." He pointed to a nearly vertical rock face to their east. "There's a climb there, difficult but manageable. It leads to a shepherd's path along the ridgetop. Adds distance, but offers concealment and vantage points." Sarah studied the imposing cliff. "You can make that climb." Eagle Eye smiled slightly. "I've been climbing these rocks since before your husband was born." They resumed their journey, angling toward the cliff face. As they walked, Sarah found herself studying her companion, this man who had been James's friend and mentor. She saw in his movement and vigilance the source of skills James had later taught her. "How did you and James meet?" she asked during a brief water break. Border Operations 2001, Eagle Eye replied. Military hired local trackers. Most of the soldiers saw us as tools, not people. James was different. Wanted to learn, not just use. Ah, that sounds like him, Sarah said, memories of James's endless curiosity warming her despite the circumstances. He spoke of you often, Eagle Eye continued. Said you were the strongest person he knew. Better in the desert than any soldier he'd trained. Sarah looked away, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. He exaggerated. I don't think so, Eagle Eye said, watching her carefully. You've survived everything they've thrown at you. Turned the hunters into prey. And not by choice, Sarah replied bitterly. They took my son. Yet you still carry the burden James left you, Eagle Eye observed. Still fight to complete his mission. Before Sarah could respond, a glint of light caught her eye, sun reflecting off something metallic on the ridge above them. She reacted instantly, tackling Eagle Eye, as a shot rang out, the bullet impacting where they had been standing a moment before. Sniper! She hissed, dragging the old man behind a rock formation. Eagle Eye grimaced, a dark stain spreading across his shirt near his shoulder. They found us. Sarah quickly assessed the wound through and through, painful but not immediately life-threatening. She tore strips from her shirt to create a pressure bandage. How many? Eagle Eye asked through gritted teeth. Sarah peered carefully around their cover, analyzing the terrain. At least one on the ridge. Probably a spotter with him, more likely approaching from the trail. The stone, Eagle Eye said urgently. If they take me, you must go on. Nobody's taking anyone, Sarah replied, securing the bandage around his shoulder. She checked the Barrett rifle, calculating angles and distances to the sniper position. Cover me, she told Eagle Eye, handing him her sidearm. I need 30 seconds. Before he could protest, Sarah was moving a quick dash to a smaller rock formation 20 yards away. A shot kicked up dust at her heels, but her unpredictable movement pattern made her a difficult target. From her new position, she had a better angle on the ridge. She assembled the Barrett with practiced efficiency, loading a round into the chamber and adjusting the scope. Through the magnified view, she scanned the ridgeline until she found them, two figures partially concealed behind rocks. One with a rifle, one with binoculars. Sarah controlled her breathing, letting it slow as James had taught her. The crosshairs steadied on the sniper's position. She exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett's report echoed across the desert as the high-caliber round found its target. The spotter ducked for cover, but too late. Sarah's second shot caught him in the chest, sending him tumbling down the steep slope. She was already moving back to Eagle Eye when a new sound reached them, vehicles approaching from the direction of the mining trail. Can you move? She asked, helping Eagle Eye to his feet. I'll manage, he said grimly, clutching his wounded shoulder. They began a painful retreat toward the cliff face, moving from cover to cover as the vehicles drew closer. Sarah caught glimpses of a police cruiser among the approaching vehicles. The local sheriff compromised, as Eagle Eye had warned her. We'll never make the climb with your injury, she said as they reached the base of the cliff. Eagle Eye knew she was right. There's a cave system, he said, pointing to a nearly invisible crack in the rock face. Connects to the shepherd's path higher up. Tight passages, defensible. Sarah helped him toward the narrow opening. Behind them, vehicles were now visible, two jeeps and the sheriff's cruiser closing fast. The cave entrance was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through, opening into a low-ceiling passage that twisted deep into the cliff. Sarah helped Eagle Eye along, noting with concern that his breathing had become labored, his skin pale beneath its weathered tan. Stop, he gasped after they had gone perhaps 100 yards. Need to rest. Sarah eased him down against the cave wall, checking his wound. The bandage was soaked through with blood, and his pulse was rapid and weak. Blood loss and shock were setting in. You need real medical attention, she said, digging in her pack for the small medical kit. Eagle Eye shook his head. No time. They're coming. He reached into his shirt and withdrew a leather pouch hanging from a cord around his neck. Take this. Map to another hideout. Agent Collins knows it. We'll both go, Sarah insisted, replacing the blood-soaked bandage with a fresh one. Sarah, Eagle Eye said, his voice suddenly stronger as he gripped her wrist. I've lived my life, seen my seasons change. Your fight isn't over. The sound of voices echoed from the cave entrance. McLean's men had found their trail. I'll hold them here, Eagle Eye said, taking the pistol from her. Buy you time to reach the upper passage. I won't leave you, Sarah protested. James would expect you to complete the mission? Eagle Eye replied, his expression leaving no room for argument. Honor him, honor your son. Finish this. Sarah recognized the look in his eyes, the same determination she had seen in Michael's face before he sacrificed himself at the farm. She knew arguing was pointless. She reached into her jacket and pressed the stone into Eagle Eye's hand. Give this to Collins, she said. I'll draw them off. Eagle Eye stared at her in surprise. What are you doing? Hunting, Sarah replied, simply checking the Barrett's magazine. I'll lead them away from you. Create a diversion. You get the stone to Collins. They'll kill you. Sarah's eyes hardened. They can try. Before Eagle Eye could object further, she moved deeper into the passage, finding a junction where it branched in two directions. She deliberately scuffed the ground leading into the left passage, then took the right, which began a steep ascent toward the surface. Behind her, she heard Eagle Eye positioning himself in the shadows, ready for his last stand. McLean entered the cave cautiously, Sullivan and Sheriff Harris behind him. Two more of his reinforcements, local mercenaries hired to replace his fallen team, secured the entrance. Tracks lead this way, Sullivan noted, pointing to disturbances in the dusty floor. McLean nodded. Harris, stay at the entrance. No one gets out. The sheriff hesitated. Maybe I should come with you. I know these caves. Your job is to ensure we're not flanked, McLean said flatly. Do it. As Harris reluctantly retreated, McLean and Sullivan advanced deeper into the passage, weapons ready. The cave narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file. Blood drops, Sullivan observed, indicating dark spots on the stone floor. Someone's wounded, McLean smiled coldly. Good. They reached the junction where Sarah had created her false trail. Sullivan knelt, examining the markings. Left passage, he concluded. Recent. McLean studied the dust pattern with narrowed eyes. Something felt wrong. The markings too obvious, too convenient. Wait, he said as Sullivan started toward the left passage. Check both. Sullivan frowned but complied, examining the right passage entrance. Nothing here. They went left. McLean remained unconvinced but nodded. You take right anyway. I'll go left. Maintain radio contact. As Sullivan disappeared into the right passage, McLean advanced slowly into the left, all senses alert for traps or ambushes. The passage curved downward, growing darker and narrower. He had proceeded perhaps 50 yards when a voice spoke from the shadows ahead. Hello, McLean? Eagle Eye sat against the cave wall, his wounded shoulder creating a dark stain on the stone behind him. A pistol rested in his lap, though he made no move to raise it. McLean approached cautiously, weapon trained on the old man. Where is she? Gone, Eagle Eye replied calmly. As is what you seek. I don't believe you, McLean said, glancing around for signs of Sarah or traps. That is your choice, Eagle Eye observed. But it changes nothing. McLean studied the wounded man, noting the severity of his injury. You're dying, old man. We are all dying, some faster than others. Eagle Eye smiled slightly. How long since your last treatment, McLean? 5 months 6. Are the headaches starting yet? The tremors in your hands? McLean's expression hardened. Shut up. Oh, they didn't tell you, did they? Eagle Eye continued. Project Chimera's enhancements aren't permanent. They degrade the neural pathways. Without regular treatments, the mind breaks down. Memory fails. Personality disintegrates. I said shut up. McLean's hand tightened on his weapon. James tried to help you. Eagle Eye said, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. Before he discovered what Westbrook was really doing, he considered you a friend once. Fa. James was weak, McLean spat. Too concerned with rules and morality to see the bigger picture. And what is the bigger picture that justifies turning men into mindless weapons, children into experiments? McLean's radio crackled with Sullivan's voice. Nothing in the right passage, heading back to the junction. Eagle Eye sighed. You're running out of time, McLean, as am I. Where is the stone? McLean demanded. With Sarah, Eagle Eye replied. Far beyond your reach by now. Erie, you're lying. She wouldn't leave you. She would to complete the mission. Eagle Eye's eyes held a certainty that made McLean uneasy. James taught her well. McLean stood silent for a moment, then raised his weapon to Eagle Eye's head. Last chance. Where is she heading? Eagle Eye met his gaze without fear. To justice. Something you've forgotten exists. McLean's finger tightened on the trigger. He won't tell you anything, came Sarah's voice from behind him. McLean spun to find her standing at the passage entrance, the Barrett rifle aimed at his chest. He doesn't know, she continued. I didn't tell him where I was going. McLean kept his weapon trained on Eagle Eye. Drop the rifle, Sarah, or the old man dies. He's dying anyway, Sarah replied, her voice steady. But he'll outlive you. Mexican standoff. McLean calculated his options. Sullivan would return to the junction soon. The odds would shift in his favor. What did James tell you about me? He asked, buying time. That I was a monster, a traitor. He said you were a good soldier once, Sarah responded, before Project Chimera hollowed you out. McLean's laugh had no humor in it. James always did think he was better than everyone. His moral superiority didn't save him in the end. No, Sarah agreed, but it might save others. A sound from further up the passage, Sullivan returning. McLean allowed himself a small smile. Your position is untenable, Sarah. Even if you shoot me, Sullivan will kill you both. The stone will go back to Westbrook. All this, your son, your husband, for nothing. Sarah's expression remained impassive. You still think this is about escaping, about running away? She shook her head slightly. I stopped running days ago, McLean. This is a hunt now, and you're the prey. Before McLean could respond, a gunshot echoed through the cave, but not from any of their weapons. From the entrance came sounds of struggle, then silence. That would be Sheriff Harris, Sarah said. Another piece removed from the board. Doubt flickered across McLean's face for the first time. You're bluffing. Am I? Sarah kept the rifle steady. Sullivan's not coming either. The right passage had its own surprises. McLean's radio remained silent, confirming her claim. His options were rapidly diminishing. The stone, he said, desperation entering his voice. Just give me the stone, and this ends. It's already over, Sarah replied. Agent Collins has the stone by now. I sent it with one of Eagle Eye's people hours ago. Everything you've done, everyone you've killed, was for nothing. Rage twisted McLean's features. He spun back toward Eagle Eye, weapon raised to execute the wounded man. In that moment of distraction, Sarah fired. The Barrett's round caught McLean in the shoulder, spinning him and slamming him into the cave wall. His weapon clattered to the stone floor. Sarah approached cautiously, keeping the rifle trained on him as he slumped against the wall, clutching his shattered shoulder. You won't kill me, McLean gasped through the pain. Not in cold blood. You're too much like James. Sarah considered him for a long moment. Maybe once, she admitted, but the desert changes people, strips away pretense, leaves only what's necessary to survive. She raised the rifle, aiming at his head. McLean's expression shifted, fear replacing arrogance. Wait, he pleaded. I was following orders. Westbrook is the one you want. You killed my son, Sarah said, her voice terrifyingly calm. I didn't, McLean began, but Eagle Eye interrupted. Sarah, the old man called weakly. He's right. She glanced at Eagle Eye, confusion crossing her face. Not about following orders, Eagle Eye clarified. About Westbrook. The general is the disease. McLean is merely a symptom. He deserves to die, Sarah insisted. Yes, Eagle Eye agreed. But killing him won't bring Michael back, or James. His eyes held hers across the dimly lit cave. What would they want you to become? Sarah stood frozen, the rifle unwavering. Images of Michael flashed through her mind, laughing as a child, serious as he worked beside her, on the farm, determined in his final moments. She saw James, too, his gentle strength, his unwavering moral compass. Slowly, she lowered the rifle. You're right, she told Eagle Eye. They'd want justice, not vengeance. As she turned toward Eagle Eye, a sandstorm of rage and desperation overtook McLean. He lunged for his fallen weapon, raising it toward Sarah with murder in his eyes. Eagle Eye's pistol barked once. McLean collapsed, a neat hole in his forehead, his eyes still wide with shocked fury. Sometimes, Eagle Eye said softly, justice and vengeance walk the same path. Henri, a massive sandstorm descended that night, burying the cave entrance and the bodies within it. By the time Sarah had helped Eagle Eye to the ranger station 30 miles north, Nature had reclaimed the battlefield, leaving no trace of the conflict that had played out beneath the desert sun. Agent Collins arrived by helicopter the following morning, a grave-faced man in his 40s with the watchful eyes of someone who had spent years building a case against powerful enemies. "James spoke highly of you," he told Sarah as medical personnel attended to Eagle Eye's wounds. "Said if anything happened to him, you'd be the one to finish what he started." "I almost didn't," Sarah admitted, watching the medical evacuation helicopter lifting off with Eagle Eye inside. "Came close to losing myself in the desert." Collins nodded, understanding. "Vengeance is a powerful motivator, but a poor compass." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "With the stone? With Westbrook?" "The evidence is being processed," Collins replied. "Multiple agencies involved highest security clearance. Westbrook was taken into custody 3 hours ago, along with several key Project Chimera personnel." "Will it be enough men like Westbrook have connections, influence?" Collins' expression hardened. "This goes beyond influence. Human experimentation, illegal weapons development, assassination of American citizens. Even Westbrook's friends in Washington can't sweep this under the rug." Sarah wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded acceptance. The fight had moved beyond her now into the realm of courts and governments. Her part was finished. "What will you do?" Collins asked as they walked toward the waiting vehicle that would take them to the nearest airfield. Sarah looked out at the desert stretching endlessly around them, beautiful and deadly, the landscape that had claimed so much from her, but also saved her life. "I don't know," she admitted. "The farm is gone. Michael is gone." She fell silent, the weight of loss momentarily overwhelming her. "Eagle Eye mentioned something," Collins said after a respectful pause. "Said he had land near the reservation, a place where he taught desert survival to local youth. Said he'd want you to have it if—" He left the sentence unfinished. "If he doesn't make it," Sarah completed. The doctors had been guardedly optimistic about Eagle Eye's chances, but at his age, with such a significant blood loss, nothing was certain. "Think about it," Collins suggested. "James's work will continue through what you've done here. Maybe Michael's legacy could live on, too, teaching others to survive." Sarah considered this as they reached the vehicle. The idea had merit, using her skills not for war, but for preservation, teaching women and children from the reservation the same techniques that had kept her alive through this ordeal. "I'll think about it," she promised. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of a modest cabin overlooking a stretch of desert, different from her former home, but no less beautiful in its stark severity. Eagle Eye's land, now hers by his bequest, comprised 40 acres of varied terrain, perfect for training. The old man had survived his injuries but chosen to remain in the Veterans Hospital, where he could receive proper care for his failing health. "The desert has had enough of my footprints," he had told her during her last visit. "Time for new paths to be made." Behind the cabin, Sarah had constructed a simple training area, obstacle courses, target ranges, and survival stations where she now taught weekly classes to women and children from the nearby reservation. The skills that had once been for warfare were being repurposed for empowerment. Agent Collins visited occasionally, bringing updates on the Chimera investigation. Westbrook had been convicted on multiple charges, his network of illegal operations dismantled. McLean's body had never been recovered from the cave, buried too deeply by the sandstorm, but dental records from the other casualties had provided sufficient evidence of what had occurred. Sarah's name had been kept out of official reports, a courtesy arranged by Collins to allow her to rebuild her life without media attention or potential retaliation from Westbrook's remaining allies. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah heard a vehicle approaching, an unfamiliar pickup truck, raising dust along the access road. She tensed briefly, old habits still strong, her hand moving instinctively toward the rifle kept by the door. The truck parked in the yard, and a Native American woman emerged with a young boy of perhaps 10. The woman approached the porch cautiously, while the boy hung back by the truck. "Are you Sarah Blackwood?" the woman asked. Sarah nodded, relaxing slightly but remaining alert. "I'm Maria Whitecloud. Eagle Eye is my uncle." The woman gestured to the boy. "This is my son, David. Uncle told us you teach survival skills here." Sarah studied the boy, thin but strong-looking, with intelligent eyes that reminded her painfully of Michael at that age. "I do," she confirmed. "Basics for now." Advanced classes for those who show aptitude. Maria nodded. David's father is gone. The boy needs to learn strength resilience. Her expression softened slightly. Uncle says you understand loss. Says you can teach more than just physical survival. Sarah looked at the boy again, seeing in him the potential for growth, for something positive to emerge from all the pain and death she had experienced. Does he want to learn? She asked. David, Maria called. Come here. The boy approached the porch, standing straight before Sarah with a mixture of nervousness and determination in his posture. My mom says you can teach me to survive, he said, his voice steady despite his obvious anxiety. Can you? Sarah thought of James, of Michael, of Eagle Eye, of all they had taught her, about survival being more than just physical endurance, about how the greatest survival skill was keeping your humanity intact even when the world tried to strip it away. Yes, she told the boy, offering her hand. I can teach you to survive. As David took her hand, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not healing exactly, for some wounds never truly heal, but a realignment. A new purpose forming from the ashes of her old life. The desert had taken everything from her. Now she would use what it had taught her to ensure others never suffered the same fate. In the distance, a hawk circled against the darkening sky, free, vigilant, enduring. Like her. The desert remembers what others forget. Footprints fade, blood washes away, but the land holds the echoes of those who've crossed it. Sarah Blackwood came to these sands as a survivor, fleeing devastation. She leaves as something else entirely, not quite healed, but transformed. The same hands that once took lives now guide others toward preservation. The same eyes that once tracked enemies now watch children learn to read the land's ancient language. The stone that cost her everything, her husband, her son, her home, now rests in a secured government vault, its secrets exposed, its purpose fulfilled. Justice came, though not in the form she expected. Not through the barrel of a rifle, but through the resilience of truth that, like water in the desert, always finds its way to the surface. Some nights when the wind carries whispers across the dunes, she stands on her porch and listens. For James's steady counsel, for Michael's determined voice, for Eagle Eye's weathered wisdom. The desert has taken much, but it has also preserved what matters most, the legacy of those who understood its harsh beauty. In the end, perhaps the greatest survival skill isn't outlasting your enemies or enduring the elements, but finding purpose in the aftermath of loss. What would you fight to preserve when everything else has been stripped away?